Hello, and welcome to our video looking at the globalization process in the 20th and into the 21st century for Europe. In this video, we'll dive a little further into four key areas: migration, technology, feminism, and globalism, which is just a broader term encompassing cultural exchange, kind of environmental factors, and some social movements. All right, up first, let's look at migration patterns. After World War II, millions of people across Europe were displaced. So cities are destroyed, economies were shattered, and families were uprooted. And we see a lot of rural to urban migration that becomes common as people are looking for jobs in growing industrial centers. Additionally, former colonial subjects from Africa, the Caribbean, and South Asia begin immigrating to European cities, especially in Britain, France, and the Netherlands, which will contribute to Europe's new kind of multicultural identity that they're going to have in the later 20th century. But of course, migration happening during this time period triggers, another kind of ugly feature throughout history, which is anti-immigrant movements. So we see a lot of xenophobia and political backlash as this immigration increased, especially in the 1980s and 1990s. We see the start of different anti-immigration parties like the French National Front and the Austrian Freedom Party that are going to start to gain some support. These movements reflect this kind of ongoing tension between this idea of national identity and multiculturalism, a conflict that still shapes a lot of European politics today. People still don't know how to grapple with that idea of like, you know, how do we welcome immigrants and how do we kind of like suppress, ideas about anti-immigration. Okay, moving on to number 2, technology. Technology, I think, is by far one of the things that will transform human lives, like everyday lives, the most throughout history. And especially in the 20th century, we'll see this happening. Now, a lot of the new technology that started in the 20th century was kind of coming out of World War One, World War Two, and the Cold War that pushed for the development of new tools. So things like radar to jet engines. And after the wars, these innovations start to filter into civilian life, leading to new industries and a lot of economic growth that makes us more globally connected. Post war Europe also sees a transportation revolution. Commercial air travel became more affordable and rail networks expanded. New highways, like Germany's Autobahn system, allowed for faster movement of goods and people and essentially to European integration and global commerce. You can now, you know, be able to communicate widely across different areas. You can get goods a lot faster than you ever could before. And with the creation of the European Union, all these companies can kind of be interconnected without a lot of challenges. Another big change for people, like everyday people, are going to be the development of things like radio and television. They become the great social equalizer. So, to be part of a cultural phenomenon, you just needed to turn on your TV. It didn't matter if you went to the theater to see it. You didn't have to pay for tickets to see that show. It could be streamed on TV now. And that's going to be a huge equalizer for lower classes. We also see that information gets dispersed more instantaneously. TV is going to influence advertising, housing development, leisure time. And in many ways, the internet is going to be the engine of globalization, bringing people together. But also, I mean, as we've seen in kind of more modern days, it's also kind of polarizing people through echo chambers and misinformation. Telephones, computers, the internet, all of that is going to kind of be the new cultural stage. And it's not just for entertainment, but for shaping public opinion. Popular culture can cross national boundaries. We see a lot of promoting of American influence and kind of European responses to that throughout that cultural process. But relationships change. You can talk to somebody overseas now just by picking up the phone, and that's going to be a really cool but different dynamic. We're also going to see the creation of a lot of really great medical advancements in the 20th century. So things like antibiotics, vaccines, chemotherapy, they greatly increase life expectancy. And post-war investments in public health systems ensured access to care. Now, this reflects this broader trend of this thing called the welfare state expansion, especially in Western Europe. This idea that, like, from cradle to grave, there will be someone there ensuring you have access to like social services. However, along with a lot of these different breakthroughs, we're going to see some new ethical debates. So, issues like abortion, fertility treatment, and eugenics, once tied to kind of fascist ideologies, are going to resurface in new forms. We'll see questions about aging and healthcare cost and medical autonomy continue to challenge societies worldwide. Nobody has the answers or all the answers to these questions. And that's going to bring us to topic number 3, feminism. During both world wars, women are going to join the workforce in massive numbers. They're working in factories, they're working in healthcare, they're doing jobs traditionally that were held for men. And after the wars, many are going to remain in the labor force, which drives this need for a childcare infrastructure that never, existed before. When women are working, who's going to take care of their children? And it reshapes a lot of gender roles. We see states like Sweden and France developing really generous parental leave and child support systems to help support working families. And so we'll see other European states take on different approaches to fund early childcare services as well. Early feminism, or really kind of first wave feminism, revolves around basic rights and suffrage. And that's all going to happen right there at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And then second wave feminism is going to be in the 60s and 70s. So, second wave feminism is going to focus more away from suffrage to broader issues like career opportunities, reproductive rights, and women's autonomy, their ability to be individual, like wholly functioning humans in our society. And feminists are going to challenge a lot of traditional family roles and demand representation in all spheres of society. Birth control is going to play a large role in the change of this culture. One of the leading voices for that second wave feminist movement is Simone de Beauvoir, and she is a French writer and philosopher an existentialist. She argues against this thing called the myth of the eternal feminine, and she has this work called The Second Sex that she publishes in 1949 that kind of remains the foundation of modern feminist theory. She kind of helps redefine women not as like other, but as some autonomous individual, equal in potential and agency, that they have worth, they have value, and have like all of those same kind of internal, almost humanist factors that men do. As a result of all of that second wave feminist activism, we do see some social and political change, happening across Europe. And one of the biggest influencers in that change is going to be we'll see female leaders for the first time in European history, like true elected leaders. So people like Margaret Thatcher in the UK, or Edith Crescent in France, or Mary Robinson in Ireland. um, they break a lot of really long-standing barriers. Today, female leadership is a lot more common than it used to be, but we do see that representation still varies pretty widely by country. There's definitely no like, um, you know, universal sign of female leadership. And that brings us to globalism. So, despite two world wars and global pandemics that happened in the 20th century with like the Spanish flu and the polio, pandemics, we do see that Europe's population will rise dramatically in the 20th century. The post war boom. It was driven less by birth rates and more by longer life expectancy. So, thanks to kind of that stability and peace and access to better medical care, people are living longer. In the Cold War era, American consumer culture really spread across Europe, and things like Coca-Cola, kind of Hollywood style, rock and roll, all of those things. Um, a lot of Europeans kind of embrace that change. Others criticize for what they see as materialism and kind of cultural homogenization, which just means that like we're starting to see that everybody kind of has the same ideas about culture and what's popular and what's fashionable. And a lot of pockets of Europe don't really like that. They want to kind of explore their own brands, art, and ideas. In agriculture, we have the green revolution happening, brought on by things like chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified crops, which increases food production. So we can now make more food with kind of like less energy. So while it does help feed growing populations, it also raises concerns about environmental damage. If you're only, making certain types of crops because they are the easiest to make and they feed the most people, then you are kind of overusing your soil, you're not using best like agricultural practices, different things like that. People are worried about environmental damage and also kind of the corporate control of food, the fact that it's basically these major companies controlling our food supply. And industrial growth that happens in the 20th century also comes at a cost. We see more pollution, deforestation, and climate change. Environmental movements are going to start popping up all around Europe that are going to push governments to try to regulate industry and preserve ecosystems. So, green political parties will gain a lot of traction in the kind of like early 21st century in countries like Germany and the Netherlands that put a kind of high value on environmental factors. We'll also see in the 20th century that the fight for LGBTQ rights start to evolve. In the 1950s and 60s, many countries will criminalize same sex relationships, but over time and with a lot of activism, especially after the AIDS crisis, we see that their rights do start to grow. And in today, Western Europe broadly protects LGBTQ rights. We do see some challenges persist, though, especially in places like Russia and Hungary. They still largely discriminate against the community. Globalization has really helped reshape Europe's economy, their identity, and their culture. And while it's brought a lot of connection and cooperation through things like technology, it's also produced some new tensions between tradition and change. And I think that's kind of the kind of broader legacy that it leaves is, how does Europe, keep a lot of its initial integrity, its culture, its background, its history, while also changing to adapt to, modern features and technology. And that's what we've got for today. Thanks for watching.